Hi, welcome everybody. We're just gonna wait a few minutes as people start to log on. Okay, and as we wait for everybody to log on, I'm gonna go ahead and just put up a video, a 2-minute video for you guys, just kind of like a Awamori teaser, kind of get you in the right mindset here. So let me go ahead and share my screen, if I can find the right screen. It's completely disappeared. But let's just share this screen. Hopefully it'll pop up. Are you guys seeing?
Yep.
Yep, okay. Oops, did it disappear? All right. Let me see if I can escape from this screen sharing. Okay. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. So hopefully you know me by now, but my name is Ida Vong. I am a sake specialist for Sake School of America. I also work for Mutual Trading Company. And today I am joined by the amazing Toshio Ueno and Nick Korn. So Ueno-san is actually a Awamori Jinbner as well as Nick Korn, and they were appointed with that really honorable title last year in 2020. Ueno-san is also the co-founder as well as one of our instructors here at Sake School of America. And I'm gonna go ahead and let you guys know what we're gonna be doing today, first of all. So Ueno-san's gonna introduce our guest, Nick Korn, and then he's gonna go into this kind of Awamori 101. It's actually quite in depth for a 101. So I highly recommend you take notes the best you can, because we will have a quiz all the way at the end for a chance to win the Shochu Advisor class. And then after that, we'll have our Awamori and food pairing session by Nick Korn. He's going to show us a couple of cocktails and like what food he's chosen to pair it with today. I know a lot of Japanese spirits and Japanese sake tends to get paired with Japanese food, but we're going to try to do something different. And then we're going to have a little Q&A as well as a little bit more on the events we have coming up this month and then the first week of March as well. And then you'll have your quiz. So good luck, everybody. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ueno-san.
think you're on mute, Ueno.
I'm not used to it. Good, guys. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Aomori Sunrise. And let me introduce Nick Korn. I haven't met him in person, but I know him from being a Jinbner, Awamori Jinbner with me. And I know he went to Okinawa and also Kusu region to study shochu and Aomori. And then last year to this year, we studied together about Aomori. So I'm going to be presenting something, but he is in such a big, look at this background. Here is a background in anthropology and addiction to travel. And he has his own company, marketing and strategy firm focused on changing paradigms in the liquor industry. And he lives in Boston. And he's a cool dude. So we'll see how he's gonna, pair Awamori with his choice of food this time is tacos, guys. So I will give the baton to Nick after my a little bit of knowledge on Awamori, and then his turn's gonna be coming up. So looking forward to it. You can skip, you can kind of, just watch mine, but pay attention to Nick's presentation. Okay. So, Japan, as many people hasn't been Japan, but here is Japan right next to China. Our climate is greatly affected by continent with China. So summertime is very hot and wintertime is very cold. As you can see, like here, it's China, Russia. So the wind coming from here in the wintertime, very cold. And Okinawa is right here. And it lies point between East Asia and Japan. And it's a subtropical climate they have. So wintertime is even, you don't need a coat. It's very warm there. And then the size is around, this, you can see this, the size compressing here. From New York to Kentucky, and those are the size of Okinawa, and they have many islands, 160 islands in Okinawa. So a bunch of small islands get together and they call Okinawa. But they used to be, so it's in the island, so the nature is so beautiful. Like if we're going to tropical islands and that's where I want to retire and be there in Okinawa and have a nice cocktail with Nick in the future. And yeah, those are the nice places when you go, retiring in place, and very warm throughout the year and beautiful natures there. And Okinawa used to be a different country. It used to be a Ryukyu kingdom from 15th century to 19th century. As you can see, this guy's like here is the first king, Shoen, and that's things I didn't know that he's a first king. I've been to this place before, Okinawa, the Imperial Court. It's very beautiful, but unfortunately, it was they got fired a year ago. So, but anyway, we Ryukyu Kingdom used to have a commercial, economical, political, cultural, relationship with many countries, more than mainland of Japan, because this was Okinawa is here closer to other countries. And so, Aomori, as you know, is made with Thai rice, right? It's coming from Thai, right? From here, Bangkok, and coming here. I mean, people say it's coming from, the technique is coming from, actually it's from Mesopotamia, current day of Jiraku, where the distillation method was invented. But, people say it must be coming from the Silk Road. No, Silk Road took more time than transporting culture and the goods on the ship. So ship was much quicker. And they had more relationship with Thai. So still they use Thai rice, jasmine rice or long grain rice for making Aomori. And because of that, they have a really, really different culture. They have, most of the karate in Japan is coming from Kusu, Okinawa. And those dye textiles and those dancing and those sanshin, shamisen music is totally different from mainland. And they speak a little bit different dialects from us. Sometimes I don't understand sometimes, but that's that. And so many liquor has brought from other country between these years, like 1431, but mainly 15th century, and then so Aomori has been brewed from 16th century in Okinawa, and production is like this. You have jasmine, long grain rice. You polish them, taking out the outer blondes or the brown parts out because it has proteins and lipids. You don't want to have too much, and then you soak them, you steam them, and then when you steam it, the amylase or those structure of the starch will be gelatinized, so the koji can grow into the grain easily to convert the starch to sugar. So that's what this the chart shows, and so. The koji is another thing that you have to know, is that it's very unique to Japan. The technique of making sake and shochu is coming from China, but the koji we use is different from those countries. We use, sake is made with yellow koji, but shochu and especially Aomori is made with black koji. You can see the black spore here. And why we need this is that starch doesn't have a sugar. Grain doesn't have a sugar by itself, so it's not like wine. You make a juice and start put the yeast and start fermenting. It doesn't happen like that because of grain. So you have to convert the starch to sugar by using this microbe called koji. And for Aomori, it's black koji. Okay, you see that this is under the microscope. Looks like a Japanese national flower, chrysanthemum flower. Actually, it's very unique. And after koji making, you put water, yeast, and start fermenting. And during the koji making, what's going to happen is these the starch will be sugarized, converted to sugar. As I said, starch to sugar by this enzyme. These enzymes will break down the starch chain to smaller pieces so that yeast can eat them and start producing CO2 and gas, and mainly we need alcohol. Okay, but that was the Okinawan or Japanese way of doing it. But in other countries, Asian country uses a different thing, like Taiwan uses red koji, and Korea uses nuruku, and China chu or daikyu they use, and lukpan for Thailand. So they, we have a different kind of microbes we use for making liquor from grains. Okay. Oh yeah, this is a black koji. Looks like. Okay. And why we need the black koji is still used, and many shochu maker is using them, is that because of this, it produces a high level of citric acid. For some of you have studied the sake, I think, and sake, you put lactic acid at the beginning, or you make a natural way of harboring the lactic bacteria into the mash, Kimoto style. Or the reason why we do that is protecting the yeast from unwanted bacteria, because bacteria is weak, cannot survive in high level of acidity level. So that's why we need a lot of acid. For sake, you will use lactic acid, but for shochu and Aomori, especially black koji, produce very high level of citric acid. Especially in the southern region, subtropical weather, the humidity and temperatures go up. So we need a strong Koji producing that acid. And then Koji is usually made by this by hand, or in this case by spiral Koji making machine in there, and you sprinkle the Koji more onto the rice, and the Koji rice is done and will come down from this how do you say conveyor belts down to the tank. And so you put Koji, yeast, and water, and making a fermentation. So this will start fermenting because Koji will break down the starch to sugar, the yeast eat them, and the water is needed to be yeast to slide also. So this is a ferment or mash. Looks like this black liquid. Okay. And then you use a pot still, or this is very unique in Okinawa, much wider liquid mash area, meaning when you distill them, you have more heavier compounds will be evaporated. And also this is a short neck, so there will be a less condensation or reflux. So you will get more bold, complex, and richer flavored shochu in that way. If this one is like next one has higher neck, I cannot see my. Oops. Yeah, this one has a little bit more higher the pipe going up, so there is a more reflux, so it'll be more lighter textured and flavored shochu. It'll be coming out from the distillate as a distillate. Okay. So sometimes this angle is very important too. This angle is much more steeper. It will give you a much more. It will give you less reflux, meaning it will give you a much more bolder, heavier alcohols and more complexity to it. Okay, I'm not gonna go and get into that too much. And we're gonna have a kusu today, so I just want to talk about aging of Aomori. Usually, shochu in Japan is they don't age them so often, but Aomori you can use. There is a term called kusu. Kusu is same Chinese character as koshu, meaning aged Aomori, and they do this refilling like very similar to Sherry's Solera system. So you take it out from this old one, but if you take it out, you have to fill it, the new one, from this one to that one to this. So that's how they age their Aomori, and that process is called shitsugi. But in sherry production, we call Solera method. Okay. And before the war, we had had 200, 300 years old aged Aomori done this way in the families and also the Aomori manufacturer. But unfortunately, we had a war, and many of them are destroyed. And I know only like few ceramic pot is 40 years old or 50 years old available now. And then many components from the aging will come out, especially the Nick might will explain about some of the last kusu we're gonna have has more complex flavor and aroma from these compounds, especially vanillins and shiitake mushrooms coming from this 4-vinyl guaiacol is shiitake mushroom smells. So these are very, very unique for Aomori and also aging Aomori, and you have this kind of flavor and aroma components. And lastly, for this quick basic Aomori session, some of them have a fruity aroma, grassy, nutty aroma, cereal, and some of them have like kusu, we just talked about, aged one, have this gaudy, soapy, some of them caramel and vanilla, and it's really more complex. And some of them have a little bit of oiliness on mouthfeel too. Okay. And these are, Aomori, Japanese Aomori in the shochu is very unique because we drink them as we eat. It's not aperitif or digestive. It's during the meal spirits. And these are the regional food, and they like lots of pork. This is pork feet, and this is pork berries, and that's skins, and we eat them. And we just had this latte with Shibumi's Chef David last week, and it was incredible with 40 Genshu Aomori. Okay. Okay, Nick, it's your turn. And okay, I'm just gonna show you that his suggestion on what you need on the screen, and I will pass on to Nick. If you have, we can send this information later on to your email. If you want, let us know. And these are the shochu he's gonna be making cocktail with. And all these are distributed by mutual trading company, importer and distributor. And you can mostly get this one in most of the states in the United States. And the ingredients, he will go through that with you later on. This is just the recipe that I will show you. And if you want to have this one, we will give you one later. And these are the kitchen tool items you need to make this cocktail. But it's gonna be not so hard ones, he promised. So I will show this picture later on, but here you go, Nick-san. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Ueno-san. That was awesome. And Ida and the Sake School for having me. As Ueno said, we both got to sit through a really intensive an amazing program with that was put on by like the Awamori Brewers Association and the Okinawa government, and we got access to all these unbelievable educators and specialists and scientists and Awamori makers. So that was really rad. Today we're going to talk about Awamori specifically in how it should be enjoyed with food and specifically with cocktails as well. So first up, I think we talked about pairing food, and I can't help but talk about restaurants because that is where I come from. That's what I love. Obviously, 2020 and the world that we live in these days has been a terrifying blow to restaurants. So I think it's really important that you support your local restaurants. Ideally, you go out and buy a bunch of food from them. You tip too much, you go pick up food instead of going through like predatory delivery apps. Hopefully some folks have decided to already go and grab some tacos before today's class. But if you haven't, we're working, I don't know what folks in LA know about tacos, but assumedly you guys have a taqueria around. There's people from all over the country or the world, it seems. So support your local taqueria. I personally went to a taqueria called Via Mexico in Boston that I love. The owners are like a mother-daughter team, Bessie and Julie, and they're awesome and their food's really good. So if you're in Boston, you should go there. If you're not in Boston, they make the best like roasted burnt black salsa ever that you can order, and they'll send it to you. But also just go to your own taqueria, order tacos, get whatever kind of tacos you want. There's some suggestions for pairings, but honestly, just like get what you like. I grabbed a couple that we'll talk about in a minute, and also obviously guacamole, which I just think, why not go for it? And ultimately, I think Ueno made a really good point, which is I think that most beverages really should go with food. And I think culturally, some places lean into that more than others. So unfortunately in the US, there's like eating and drinking. And a lot of times when we eat, if we are drinking, we'll drink wine. But I think in a lot of places, it's kind of like gauche to even possibly drink anything without eating something. And I think Japan through and through like really embraces that. And so we'll talk a little bit about like alcohol strength. Again, I don't know who's on the call and who's listening or who's going to watch this, but if you think about like what goes with food and thinking about like alcohol strength around the sort of beer to wine percentage, so like somewhere between like 8 and 15% alcohol, that is like what loves to go with food. So, you know, drinking a straight spirit, when we think about like, you know, a lot of whiskeys are like, you know, 40% alcohol or more and more. And so like in Japan, if you're drinking whiskey, you're going to make a highball and you're going to bring the alcohol down to kind of that sweet spot between 8 and 15%, which just like loves being with food, and it elevates kind of the flavor. So the first drink that we're going to make is just a highball, because why not? And it's a super simple drink. So I'm of the mind that like if you're making cocktails, you should just use whatever you have around. And generally it should be simple. You should get good spirits. And if you like to drink them by themselves, then they'll probably taste pretty good in a cocktail. And instead of like requiring anyone to go out and buy special tools or special equipment, like that's just not what I'm all about. So you should just get what you have. And I'll kind of tell you like opportunities for substituting out different tools or items depending on what you have in your house. One thing I will say is that the reason why we sort of ended up with tacos is like two parts. One of it is like, you know, there's a general sensibility that like what grows together goes together. So whatever comes out of like the same kind of place, you can kind of have together. I think that's true actually for like latitude and climate. So if you look at like where Okinawa is, and Ueno show that on the map, you know, if I live in Boston. So if Boston was in Japan, we'd be in Hokkaido. We'd be on the North Island. It's like snowy. We've got beautiful mountains, you know, the same kind of climate. And Hokkaido makes great whiskey, you know, and so does, you know, we have great spirit producers in Boston and Massachusetts. But Okinawa is way, way farther south. And so if you look at latitudes, Okinawa sort of hits Mexico. And so we're like, okay, like if we're thinking about bringing things to our hemisphere, then Okinawa kind of matches up with Mexico. Also, I love Japan. I love Mexico. If you've ever met me before, we've probably eaten or talked about eating tacos. So I think that, you know, pairing can go across cultures. You don't have to only eat, you know, sushi with Japanese spirits or whatever, not to mention there's so much more amazing Japanese food beyond that. And what you eat in Okinawa. Okinawa is this crazy place. I think Ueno didn't really talk about it, but culturally, because of all those trade routes, there's just like so many influences and so many flavors. And like you are barely in Japan when you're in Okinawa. And the folks feel different. Like you said, the language is so different. The food is wildly different. The music, the kind of culture. So why not just go to Mexico at that point? Okay, so for our drink, we're gonna do a highball. So highball is really, really simple. I'm sure you've like heard highball. It's like all trendy these days, but really it just means a spirit, something bubbly, and like that's about it. And so it's supposed to be made with care. That's kind of the key, instead of just dumping a bunch of things together. So again, the spirit that we're gonna have for this one is called Hanashimauta, which is one of the, did I say that right? I'm trying really hard. Okay, so Hanashimauta is like really light and bright and sort of citrusy and kind of beautifully floral. And so we're just gonna lean into just like letting it do its thing. I think if you added a lot of ingredients to the glass, you sort of clobber over the top of it. Anyway, so you take like a really careful measured amount of the spirit, which I would say like about 2 ounces. And obviously you can use whatever ice you have in your house, whatever glass. This is clearly not like a super fancy glass, but it is super fancy ice. And we just want to get everything really cold. So basically, like I put the glass in the fridge before we started. I put the spirit in the freezer before we started. Just try to get everything really cold. And then the key for a highball is bubbles, right? So get the bubbliest bubble that you can get. I figured because we're showcasing Mexican food, we might showcase Mexican soda water, because why not? So Topo Chico, I have a special place in my heart for. It is very carbonated and very salty. There's tons of minerals in the spirit, which I actually really love. If you don't have Topo Chico, you can use whatever carbonated water you want. In Japan, they really have some unbelievable carbonated waters. But generally speaking, I really like the salty ones. And if you use just like regular carbonated water, I would recommend adding a little bit of salt. it really like helps bring the spirit up. You don't want to stir it too much once you put the soda water in, but I would just like do like a little lifty lift just so that the soda and the spirit mix together. And then for this spirit, because it's so light and floral and bright, I'd recommend using an orange peel as a garnish. So if you see, let's see if this works, but basically if you go to the cocktail, if you think about the orange side and the white side of an orange, and I just use like a peeler on a piece of orange, face the orange part towards the drink. And if you can look closely, you might see like a little spray. There's tons of oils in the orange. Let's see what happens. Maybe not. And then that can go in or it can come out or whatever you want. So that's the, yeah, that kind of works. So that's the highball with the Hanashimauta. And I think it's really tasty. It goes great with guacamole if you want to start in the appetizer world. It goes really well with like kind of pork or citrusy, sweeter tacos. So like carnitas or el pastor would go really well with this highball, and I would definitely recommend it. In terms of, I can only kind of see some of the comments, but Ueno, if you want to read out if there's questions or comments, basically in terms of ratios, what I did for this drink was basically 1 part of spirit to like 2 to 2.5 parts of the alcohol. This spirit is actually, a lot of Awamori, which we didn't really talk about, is bottled quite low alcohol content. So I believe this is 24%. So again, if you put it kind of 1 to 2 with the soda water, you end up with something around 8%, which is super light, bright, really delicious, really refreshing, and absolutely wants to go with food. So that is the first drink. Ueno, is there any like comments, questions?
No, that was a question. What is the ratio? That was a question. And the other question was, which should go in first, Aomori or soda? And it's Aomori first, right?
Right, totally. Yeah, I think ideally what you're doing is like getting your glass super, super cold. I like putting this in the freezer to get it super cold. If not, you're stirring them together to get everything really cold. And then you add the soda at the last minute and just barely move it. Because if you're stirring up the soda water, you're going to allow a lot of that carbonation to leave and you're going to kind of regret it later on.
I was actually trying to follow you as you were doing this, and
I think you did great.
And I ended up stirring everything. I was like, I don't know what happened in that time frame, but, and just so you guys know, I'm actually using chopsticks and like a takeout container to do this.
So literally, highly recommend chopsticks for stirring. I worked in an amazing bar for a long time where we actually didn't have any spoons. We just used chopsticks to stir, and it works so much. It works really well. You can also just use whatever spoon, butter knife, like you don't need fancy tools. And as you can see, like I don't have fancy glassware at my house. This is like a beer mug, but that's fine. So don't feel like you need anything special. And as we get into the next drink, the same thing, like I'll kind of give you options or substitutions so that you don't have to feel like you need to go out and spend $100 at a bar tool store to get like some diamond encrusted strainer. You can just use whatever you have at home. And the good news about this is like, if you get soda water and you get the spirit, you can make this all night long, and it's super easy and really, really delicious. So that's the first drink. I guess we should move on because we got, I don't know what our timing looks like, but that's that. The second drink that we were, or the second spirit, I guess, that we were looking at was the Mizuho. And this Awamori has like way more character to it. And Ueno-san talked a little bit about the distillation process, but essentially like those crazy sideways stills, and again, without getting too scientific, most like sort of distillates and distillation has progressed to be more and more efficient. And so a lot of people like add a lot of technology to their distillation process to try to like select a very narrow part of their distillate and something that is like relatively like delicate or at least like intentional. In Awamori, they just kind of like run the still really hot and fast, and they end up with just a ton of the spirit over on the other side. It's really rustic and it's really flavorful and oily and just like absolutely delicious because they aren't really like, you know, making a super fine, very delicate, you know, vodka or something. And I love that about Awamori. And what's really cool is because of that, there's some aging that kind of has to happen to allow the spirit to sit and to mellow and sort of for esterification to happen, for the alcohols to combine with acids and create this amazing texture. So what I really like about the Mizuho is it has a lot of this kind of like rustic, rich flavors, like savory kind of soy saucy notes. Yeah, we can do that too if you want. They because of that, like it's sort of, and again, we're talking about tacos, it kind of just like pushed me in the direction of like, it's not unlike mezcal or tequila in that respect. It has this kind of like minerality, this richness that you see in some of those more rustic distillates. And I honestly, if I talk to you for a long time about Awamori and shoju, I think that mezcal is actually like the category that probably has the most in common with them, not necessarily because of the raw material or the distillation process, but just kind of in terms of how it's developed as a category. And it works just like with savory, delicious food. So with this in mind, this one is like the only real cocktail that I'm gonna make. And if you know me well, I generally don't drink cocktails more complicated than highballs. But this is basically like a margarita that we're gonna make with this, because why not? So we're gonna have tacos, so we're gonna use this Mizuho to make it. Again, so first up, we're just gonna use, make lime juice. It's about ½ an ounce of lime juice, which is like about ¼ of a lime. So if you're making for 2 people, you can use ½ a lime and you sort of end up with the amount. What I would recommend is when you cut the lime first, and I'm gonna call you out, Ida, before you get started. So I'd say cut like a wheel right out the middle of the lime, and then you end up with 2 halves that you can juice. So you get your garnish and your juice out of 1 lime. So we juice the lime, and then the second thing is simple syrup, which basically the way that I would recommend making it and the way that I make it at home is I just take like a mason jar. You can use a to-go takeout container. And again, if you've ever talked to me about anything, I probably have told you how much I love quart containers and to-go containers. But so just add, use a measuring tool of whatever you want. Measure sugar into a jar, measure an equal amount of water into the jar, and then just shake them together until they end up clear. And so basically that simple syrup, it is simple because it's simple syrup. You don't need to buy it at the store. You don't need to, take out a pan and turn on your stove and like use fossil fuels and have to wash something later. Just like put it in a jar, shake it for like a minute till it gets clear, and then you have simple syrup. So basically this is like equal parts of lime juice and simple syrup. And then that same amount times 2 of this Mizuho. And again, we're gonna have the recipe available, but that is like basically it. We end up with like a low alcohol margarita that has this like really delicious savory quality to it. Ida, you're doing an amazing job keeping up. I'm very impressed. I do have tins at home, but like I said, like shake it in a to-go container. A lot of times, like if I'll use a slightly larger mason jar as a shaking tin. But one thing I would say is really kind of shake it because you want it to get like frothy. Part of a margarita, a classic margarita a lot of times has like some amount of egg white in it or some sort of stabilizer if you buy some margarita mix. And so you want that little kind of frothy top. I apologize. I don't know what shaking is going to sound like on Zoom. Usually it just gets canceled out, so it sounds weirdly silent, but we'll see what happens. And then ideally, like the whole thing gets kind of frosty. You don't need to shake really long because this is already a pretty low alcohol thing. And everything in it is very cold to begin with. And then we can end up with this drink here that has this kind of frothy element to it. And then as we talked about, we have this wine wheel, which this one is ginormous, but you could put it on the edge of a glass. You could put it in your glass. You could make it however you want. So that's basically a Mizuho margarita, for lack of a better term. I wasn't challenged with making cocktail names, but it's also not really that complicated. So that goes really well with like a chorizo taco, if that's the direction that you want to go. But again, whatever tacos you get from whichever taqueria is in your neighborhood, go out and buy tons of them, spend a lot of money, tip them too well, and hopefully support the restaurants that are out there.
Absolutely.
I see Mike saying birria. Absolutely. Birria with Awamori margarita would be really delicious. Any other questions or comments or Ueno, do you have anything you want, or Ida, you have anything you want to add? How'd it turn out, Ida?
I actually had the driest limes in the world. So I went through 2 limes and I got like about maybe 2 teaspoons of lime juice.
That's tons, and that's fine, you know. And that's the other thing for the recipes. You can use tablespoons instead of ounces if you need to play around with that too. So again, if you don't have like a fancy jigger at home, you can use measuring spoon. Like again, there's no reason to buy a bunch of specialized equipment to make simple cocktails at home.
And then you said just add the Mizuho. How much do I add?
You do you. I don't know what you have to measure with.
I have a tablespoon.
Yeah, so I'd say 2 tablespoons to 3 tablespoons of that Mizuho would be delicious.
Nick, you still have a lot of time, so you don't have to hurry up so much. We have time.
Sure, I'm here hanging out. So if you have questions.
And also, Nick, I will ask you later on about the Kusu, because maturing the spirits in ceramic pot and other barrels and stuff. So what does it do, especially in Aomori? What kind of that I just touched a little bit of that aroma components and stuff, but how does it, some people are really geeky in this our audiences, so you can talk about those the flavor and aroma components coming out from Aomori that
sure.
makes it Kusu and also Aomori very unique.
Absolutely. So first up, before we go into Kusu, just because I don't want to forget, if you haven't yet tried, you should put some like chili peppers, like Thai. These are basically like kind of fruity, like Thai chili-esque, somewhere between Thai chili and like a habanero in Awamori, and just let it sit. And it becomes this like condiment that you end up seeing all over and in Okinawa, and it's rad with tacos, which is hilarious. So you end up with this, it kind of reminds me of like escabeche, if you've ever had like the pickled vegetables that are at like every taqueria. So there's like a lot of kind of similar ideas or ingredients across these cultures as I started to look at them. Another thing, because Ueno, you open the door to geekiness, if you think about like the process of Koji kind of converting starches, it's not unlike what's going on in the nixtamalization process of corn when you make tortillas. You're trying to basically like expand and change the structure of a grain to allow it to be more open to being processed. And so again, if you're pairing tacos with Awamori and you want to like add another level of sort of parity to the two, I would say lean into corn tacos, not just because corn tacos like are better than than flour tacos, and maybe that's a debate that I'll get into on another webinar. But other than breakfast tacos, everything should be on corn, I think, and that's not just because my last name is Korn. But if we talk about now, I just want to hear what Ida thinks. How's it taste?
It's pretty good for me, having made it out of really dry limes. And then halfway through, I was trying to rim my glass, and I realized I was supposed to rim it with lime juice, but
there's no limes to be had, so that's impossible.
Yeah, there was no lime, but it's actually really good. I really love that you paired that kind of umami, kind of richness, earthiness that comes from the Mizuho with the lime and the salt. I think it works perfectly together, and everybody needs to drink this. But yeah, and you guys probably saw me struggle, but it's really not that hard. It's only hard if you're trying to keep up with Nick. So please give it a try.
Nick, that is a question. One person's asking, how did you first experience shochu and Aomori?
How did I first experience it? Honestly, and this is probably something Ueno can explain more, but there's another distilled spirit called soju, right? That's from Korea. And the difference between soju and shochu is very big in terms of how it's produced, but very small in terms of how like a person with a small brain can approach like two words that are very similar. And so this is a long way to say, my first time tasting shochu, I was drinking soju, And I was like, what is this? Because I've had soju a lot, which is like kind of Korean vodka, for lack of a better term. And I'm probably Korean people will come chasing after me for calling it that. But it's just still very high. It doesn't have a huge amount of character. It's just like easy to drink. It's fun. You make it as a highball, no big deal. Huh, what happened there?
You've disappeared.
Yeah.
Let me see what I can do here. That's weird.
Technical difficulties. If that doesn't happen during a Zoom session, it's not really a Zoom session.
Some people are asking where you can get those Aomori. Mostly you can purchase at the Japanese supermarkets and Japanese restaurant, but mainly supermarkets would be a good place to go, and some retail liquor shop in the metropolitan areas, they should have it. And then I put the sake on the answer, and I will be introducing sake later on for they are giving us some discount if you during this shochu month or Aomori month or Japanese craft spirits month. Okay.
Yeah, I think Ueno maybe turned me off because I was talking about soju instead of shochu. But the point I was trying to make the long way around is that you know, especially, and I think it actually started in LA and in California, there's a lot of Koreans, there's a lot of Korean restaurants, and folks don't need a full liquor license, but they want to be able to serve soju at their restaurant. And so they, you know, Koreans have a certain amount of legislative pull in California in the same way that Italians do in Boston. If you're familiar with our cordial licenses, it basically happened the same way, where they got a special dispensation for soju below a certain alcohol percentage to be able to be sold at a Korean restaurant without them having to go through all the hoops and hurdles to get a liquor license. And so because of that, soju is really easy to bring into the US and or relatively easy to bring in the US and relatively easy to sell even if you don't have a full liquor license, and in California at least. And so the enterprising shochu producers in Japan basically realized if they put soju on the label instead of shochu on the label, they can get in through that same loophole. And so even though this is made in Japan and it is absolutely shochu, it says soju on the label, which makes it way more confusing. So long story short, I've drank soju for a long time with my friends that are Korean. I one time had one that was super flavorful and interesting and crazy. And I was like, what is going on with this soju? Because I've had it before and I didn't understand. And that was the first time that I had shochu, but it was labeled as shoju and I didn't figure out why it was delicious for a long time. I kind of fell in love with the spirit by going to Japan and drinking it, and basically eating food and drinking shochu is the way to have it. And so by drinking it in Japan, I fell in love with the spirit. And luckily I got a chance to visit tons of shochu and Awamori distilleries. Thank you to the generosity of the Japanese tax agency. And we just had an amazing time visiting a ton of producers, tasting shochu, eating beautiful meals alongside it as well. So that's the long story short of how I fell in love. And to answer Ueno-san's question about Kusu, so basically, again, if we talk about confusing labeling, if you look at this bottle, maybe you can see it says Koshu, right? Or which I think Ueno talked a little bit about is based on the fact that it's Chinese letters instead of kanji. But the pronunciation in Okinawa is Kusu. And so Kusu just means like aged in clay for a significant amount of time. And personally, I really love clay. I think clay is fascinating. I have taught and organized and evangelicized the value of clay in spirit production, whether it is clay stills, whether it's clay fermenters, whether it's clay aging. I've worked with different potters and ceramicists to develop clay aging vessels. I have like an old prototype on the shelf behind me. If you look on this one right here is awesome. So we visited, when I went to Okinawa, we visited Chuko, and basically Chuko has this pottery facility with these unbelievable clay. You can see like every pot has this like gorgeous coloring to it from the firing process. And they ferment and age. Well, they age a ton of their Awamori in clay, and they, after me just bothering them for months and months, they finally sent us some clay vessels. So I'm super excited to have that to play around with. And to get geeky a little bit in it, essentially clay is basic instead of acidic, right? And we talked about how Koji makes the ferment acidic, but clay makes the aging environment basic, which really changes a lot going on. Not to mention, if you're familiar with spirits being aged in wood, you know, there's a lot of things happening when something's aged, and part of it is the extraction from the material, but a lot of it is oxidation, is esterification, or things that are changing in the spirit as it sits. And frankly, there's a huge amount of oxygen in clay. So in the same way that an oak barrel will allow some breathing, will allow some oxidation to happen in a spirit, a clay vessel will do the same thing, but it will do it in a highly basic environment as opposed to an acidic environment. And you know, these clay vessels are used again and again and again. They aren't like kind of used up by aging. So, you know, barrels only have a certain amount of times they can be used, or years that a spirit can be in them until they're no longer helpful or they're going to fall apart. Clay vessels can last, you know, hundreds of years. And so over time, they're giving off less of they're creating more of a neutral, less basic environment, but they're continuing to add oxygen and specifically to create this really beautiful environment where spirits can change and esterification can happen. Speaking of Kusu, so this is the Sakura Yamakawa Kusu, and I believe, Ueno, you can correct me, but it's a blend of 5 and 15 year Kusu. So they've been aging in clay for, some of this has been aging for up to 15 years, which is amazing. And then what's really awesome, and again, I'm so excited that they decided to share these with us, is like the classic service for Kusu is this unbelievably adorable, like you want to say teapot, but it's a cara, which if you're familiar with like Spanish cuisine or Spanish drinking, is not unlike a Perón in terms of the idea of like pouring something into something and then allowing you to have kind of a tableside service. And then you pour from the cara into a chubugawa, which if you can see here is like the tiniest, most adorable, like 1/2 ounce vessel. So in the instructions, if you ask for the recipes, the instructions for serving the kusu is find the tiniest, most adorable glass that you have and serve it out of that. I don't recommend putting this in a cocktail. It has like so much going on that it kind of is doing its own thing. And then the service, they do these like unbelievable, beautiful, like long pours, and it gets all like a nice little bubble on top. And you end up, the clay service vessel also changes, right? It allows it to oxidize. It encourages evaporation. You end up with this, like right now, I can smell it so much from a combination of the long pour and the clay vessel, just like creates this really beautiful aromatic experience. And the spirit is so concentrated and so rich. And because it's allowed to sit for a long time, if you think about like distillation as being like a highly like violent process, right? Like things are torn apart and evaporated. And so when it comes back together on the other side, it's really kind of, the spirit needs time to kind of settle back down and for the elements to recombine and the molecules to create larger molecules. And so esters are basically just alcohols and acids that start to build longer and longer and longer chains that kind of lay over each other and create this texture in the spirit. So if you think about like whipping an egg white is just spreading out all of these proteins to create, you know, to create that froth. The same thing is sort of happening in a very, very slow process in esterification, where you're ending up with these really, really long protein chains that are creating texture. And that's why this spirit is so like rich and, I don't want to say syrupy, but just like mouth filling and luscious. So highly recommend. They're hard to find. It's amazing if you can find a kusu in America. And if you're lucky enough to live in California or maybe New York, you'll see them around occasionally. Here in Massachusetts, I don't even think we have any Awamori at all, let alone any kusu. So,
Thank you, Nick.
And I've noticed that you've chosen to just not make a cocktail out of it, right? You've basically told us to serve it straight in the cutest container possible. And I had like the funniest thought. I just imagine people using like little teaspoons and sitting there. But
yeah, again, if you think about like the
you also
parallels.
had a food pairing for this, so it was flan, correct?
Totally, yeah. So sorry, thank you for the reminder. So if you think about, again, the pairing or the similarities to Mexican culture, right? Like a lot of times folks see like copitas, and there's all different styles and designs of like small clay cups to drink mezcal over, or a jicara like out of a gourd. So the same kind of idea, but like, man, these chubagawas are so cute. But if you just have like, like a cordial glass or some little tiny thing to drink out of, it'll do okay, even if you don't have a perfect clay vessel. Or you can support your local ceramicists and encourage them to make you some tiny little things. In terms of the pairing, yeah, I totally, and this will be in the notes if you want to get the recipes, etc. I very much recommend like flan, again, leaning into the Mexican culture, the idea of like caramel and richness and all of these textures and flavors, they just go really well together. I sat down and had some kusu with flan, and the experience was really lovely. And the two, in terms of what a pairing can do, the two really both elevate each other and bring out flavors that you don't recognize on their own. And so I would definitely recommend, like a caramelly dessert, especially something like a flan.
And another parallel, like you were talking about the cups, for the flan, Japanese have Japanese pudding or pudding. So it's very much like the flan, where it's like a custard and it has the caramel.
Totally. Yeah. And that's the thing, when you start to dig in, you're like, oh, there's a lot of parallels between a lot of different cuisines and cultures. So were there any other questions or?
Yeah, Nick, there is one question coming. Does weather play a big role in the aging process?
Weather?
Yeah.
I mean, in general, sure. Yeah. I mean, weather definitely matters. I think more than weather, I think temperature and humidity matter. I would say that temperature and humidity matter even more in a porous vessel than in a not porous vessel. And so the idea is that absolutely temperature will accelerate any chemical reaction, right? So a warmer environment will make things happen faster. That's what happens. It's kind of like the simple syrup experience we were just talking about, right? Like we just have to put energy into that chemical reaction to make the sugar dissolve. You can put energy by shaking the heck out of it or by putting it on the stove. And so again, by a hot environment is going to put energy into chemical reactions, so they will happen faster. That's undeniable. And people play around with that. Humidity is really a huge effect when you're aging in wood, because wood is porous from end to end by the nature of how oak grows. And so ultimately, humid environments or humidity affects the way that evaporation happens. And essentially a really humid environment, you'll end up having more alcohol evaporate, and in a really dry environment, you'll end up with more water evaporating, which will change the proof or the alcoholic strength of the spirit within the barrel. For something in clay, especially if it's sealed well, and if you go to Okinawa or you go to any shochu producer, they don't just like cork or stopper their things, but they also like cover them in plastic and then cover them hopefully in like some sort of beautiful decorative cloth. But some of them just leave plastic on top, but there's plastic sheeting in there. And so ultimately it is a sealed environment. So I think thinking about the aging in clay being closer to something like aging in glass, if you go to think about like brandy producers or cognac producers who, have embraced the demi-jean and the idea that like evaporation and esterification within a closed system still changes a spirit over time. You don't need to have it to evaporate out for it to change significantly. And so I think in that respect, the humidity has less of an effect, whereas obviously temperature is going to have an effect on any chemical reaction.
Nick, can I ask you a question on the further into that humidity thing? Can you explain a little bit more to our audience why dry one the water evaporates more and the humidity ones alcohol evaporates more?
Sure. Well, to be clear, that I don't think that really happens in clay, especially when it's well sealed, but in a barrel, absolutely.
Yes.
I think it's interesting to talk about humidity, because if you've ever been to Okinawa, it's pretty hot and humid. It's like the Hawaii of Japan. So there is plenty of humidity there. So I think it's applicable. Okay, so the way that I remember it, Ueno, and this is just how my brain works, so I don't know if this is good for everybody. But if you think about like the oak as being a barrier and there being two environments, one on either side, basically on one side, like what's going to happen is the world wants to create equilibrium across that barrier, right? If it's porous. And that's just what happens for any barrier, especially in chemistry. But so essentially, if you think about the barrel having, let's say, whiskey inside, and on the outside, you have something that's really humid, right? So if the air is really humid, there's tons of water in the air, right? And there's tons of alcohol on the inside. So if it's trying to find equilibrium, what's going to leave the barrel? Is it going to be more water because there's already tons of water in the air? Or is it going to be more alcohol to try and create some equilibrium? So that's how I remember it. A really humid environment will encourage more alcohol to evaporate. If the other is true, if it's super dry out there, then more water will evaporate to try to create an equilibrium on either side of the barrier.
Good analogy and good information there.
And maybe let's end the Q&A with this final question. What is the frequency of the transfer between pots? I'm guessing this is between the Shitsugi system, maybe?
Ueno, you want to take it?
No, I think it's depending on how much you take it out. You know,
Yeah.
Depending on the production that the company is making or the family wise. But Shitsugi is, done both way, but mainly the family does a lot, because when you have a baby born, you put in, that Nick shows you that the clay pot, and keep it for until he's old enough, and you keep doing that and trying to have your own family Aomori Kusu. But for the business-wise, it's depending on how much you're taking out. Like Sakura Yamakawa, he just introduced. It's 5 to 15 years. How much we're gonna be asking them to make this bottle for us. How often, how much we are taking out from the old pot to ship it out. So.
And one thing I will say, just to add to that, obviously it depends on the producer and what they want to do, right? And I think there is a little bit of commercialization. To be fair, there's, that's less of a driver, I think, in Awamori, at least currently. But ultimately, like, if they want to sell a bunch of 5-year, then they need to have stuff that's 5 years old. The other thing I think that's really important to talk about in Awamori aging specifically is bottle aging, because as we mentioned, like aging in clay is going to change over time. And I know that like this is an argument that I get in with people all the time, but things change when they're in bottles too. I hate to break it to you. And certainly things that have a lot of disparate chemical compounds, which, as we mentioned before, the sort of rustic distillation process of Awamori does have a lot of heavier, richer compounds that aren't in a lot of other higher, more distilled spirits. So something that's distilled to a very high alcohol percentage will have a small amount of, generally the things are very similar, but the Awamori has such a wide range of different chemical compounds. So because of that, and what we talked about with clay aging a little bit, even in a closed system, Awamori does age in the bottle in the same way that wine changes in the bottle, not as much or as fast, I would say, but it absolutely changes. And I think we could have an argument about whether other spirits change depending on what they are. And so basically the key here for the bottle aging is that a lot of Awamori producers, in addition to having clay vessels, also have huge stocks of bottles that they've already bottled their Awamori, but they're sitting on them in the same way that a lot of wine producers, will have futures that they're sitting on until they're ready to release.
Fantastic answer. Since we've hit 4:04, why don't we go ahead and have Ueno-san just clean up with the upcoming events we have, and we also have a really great discount code from Sake. So Ueno-san, please take it away, and then also we will have the quiz, guys. So stay tuned.
Okay. So we are going to have a next one in 17th with Christina Beira. That's going to be another Awamori Sunrise with Awamori Jinbner. And 18th, we have a Kubota sake company. It's a life of a day of Toji. We're going to be following Toji's what he does in a day. And then 24th, we have a shochu and Thai food pairing session with Chef Tina. And also the last Aomori Sunrise is going to be March 3rd from 3 p.m. with Kaylee Thorne. And then we have more to come, actually. Japanese Craft Spirits Festival on the 28th. These tickets, you can go to their website, www.japanesecraftspiritsmonth.com. And then there's another one coming in 22nd in New York. I don't have any information, but you can Google it under Experience Shochu with Consul General of Japan in New York. And I'll be lecturing about shochu there too. So that's that. And more information on the promotion, as I mentioned, Sake is offering 50% off on their shochu Aomori selections. And discount code is JCS15. And address is www.mmsake.com. Okay. And I just wanna thank you, Nick-san, for what a wonderful presentation. And I learn from you a lot every time you speak, and you're my sensei too. And I'm so honored to have you here. And I hope you enjoy this session. And your final word, please.
Arigatou gozaimashite. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。Thank you so much. It was really fun following you with the cocktails. And I love your taco holder. But I'm going to go ahead and start the poll, the quiz, and you guys will have 2 minutes to do this. So if you get all 3 questions right, you will have a chance to win the Shochu Advisor course. And of course, there can only be one winner. So I will randomly choose one person out of everybody who's answered correctly. Oh, you're muted, Ueno-san.
No, many people, Nick, many people say thank you for your presentation. Your presentation was awesome.
Thank you for having me. This was really cool.
Yeah.
And if you enjoyed today, I'm sure Christina and Kelly's presentations are going to be way better.
No, yeah, I'll look into it, but we'll do this again, Nick, sometime in the future for shochu and Aomori. I mean, especially Aomori. Not this month, but sometime this year, we'll have another planning coming. So.
And Sarasa Suzuki, she says, great webinar, and she's ready for her Awamori margarita. It's 9 a.m. in Japan.
Yeah.
It's noon somewhere. I mean, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarasa-san.
All right, we've got about maybe 20 seconds left here.
Yeah, some people are watching this from Japan. Yeah, that's great.
And Ueno-san, are you going to tell us the answers after we close this?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
You? No.
Me. All right, I'm going to end polling. Okay, so let's go over the answers really quick. What is the color of Koji used in Awamori? It is black Koji. And what rice strain is used for Awamori? It's actually indica. So most people got the first question right. About half got the second question right. And how many Awamori makers exist in Okinawa? Ueno-san, how many?
Oh, shoot. I didn't say that, huh?
Oh, I think most people guessed and they got a pretty good answer. So is it 25, 35?
Yeah.
Which one?
25.
There's 25, 35, 47, and 51.
I should know this, huh? Wait,
Maybe I should take that last question off.
wait. 25.
35, 25, 35, 47, and 51.
$47? Hold on. Let me check that one.
Most people said 47, so.
Yeah, 47. I'm sorry. It is 47. Yes, 47.
Okay, great. 64% of you guys got that without even having being told.
You are making a very difficult quiz.
You All right, guys. We're 4:11, so 11 minutes over, but I hope that was good enough. We will be sending up a follow-up email by tomorrow, and we'll have the recipes, and we'll also have links to a survey. Please help us take the survey. It'll really help out Japan and those who kind of help fund these little webinars for us. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much, Nick, Ueno-san.
Thank you, Nick, so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Bye.